Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 30th of July 2024. It's a beautiful day outside. In fact, it's worth noting that we are engaged in some record-breaking temperatures. July the 22nd, 2024 was the hottest day on record. Average global temperatures for July 21st and 23rd also exceeded the previous record. So, a preliminary finding comes from NASA atmospheric models that combined millions of land, sea, air and satellite observations. We are in a particularly hot point in history, and that will have an effect on the battlefield. I don't know exactly what. We are seeing that conditions are very difficult to fight and to move around, and goodness me, being stuck in a tank with next to your face next to a diesel engine with nothing but a small fan to keep you cool is going to be pretty horrible. Anyway, the activities on the front lines suggest that things are still fairly active. In fact, there have been some large-scale attacks carried out by the Russians over the last day or so. Well, in fact, over this last week, it appears that there's been an almost mirror attack from the one involving sort of 57 vehicles the other day, involving pretty much the same amount of vehicles again. Anyway, 1,060 personnel lost, which is above 1,000 high, but not as high as we saw being over 1,300 yesterday. 25 plus tanks taken out. That is a really high number of tanks, and I think suggests that there has been a number of large-scale attacks. 38 armoured personnel vehicles at over double the daily average. 46 artillery systems, over double the daily average. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 53 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 6 pieces of special equipment. Indeed, Dell was speaking to me about his loss list. Remember, it is always linked in the description to the video below, that he has updated it with some new features. So that's really fantastic. Let's have a little look through them. So in between sorting out going for a beer with Dell at the end of this month, he's fairly local to me, so we're going to have a nice beer. He did say, hi, several new records in the stats today. A new daily high for the artillery, and that has also created a new 30-day moving high at 51 a day. Also, and not surprisingly, a new 30-day moving record for vehicles and fuel tanks at 68.87 a day. I mean, that's insanely high. Being bored at the moment, I've made several enhancements to the spreadsheet. New figures have been added for moving 7 and 30-day averages with note of record highs. Each of the record figures now has a note added. Hover over the figure to show the day and date of the record. So let's have a little look at that and see if I can make sense of what he's saying. So I need to obviously hover over somewhere. Here are the notes. Well, anyway, I'm not getting that hovering feeling here, but let's have a look at what is on the right hand side of the data sheet. So remember, the whole workbook has all of these different elements to it. So personnel losses, you can see over time, and it gives you trend lines, and the gradient suggests how bad it is for the Russian losses at that particular point in time. Here we have, we're looking at, say, let's go and look at artillery, right? So artillery is being lost at, if we have a look at that, so that's 18 a day on average at the moment. So it's moved to over 18 now. Interesting, we've seen that move up consistently. Median, the mode record is at 74 pieces of artillery lost in a single day. A 7-day rolling average is 51.7. So if you compare the average over the entirety of the war to what the 7-day average is, and the 30-day average. So for the last 30 days, on average, they've been losing 50 pieces of artillery a day. It's just insane. And of course, the question is always going to be, well, okay, well, what does that mean in terms? Oh, there you go. There are the notes. What does that mean in terms of relationship to Ukrainian losses and the accuracy of these figures as well? So there are the notes. Day 87, day 87, 21st of May. 2022. So those are his notes that he adds on there. So go and check that out. Have a look at the loss stats that he produces on a daily basis. Fantastic bit of Excel spreadsheeting. And we can look, if you look at the last day here, so day 888, 30th of July, we can see that the darker red the colours are, the closer it is to record highs. So yesterday for artillery, we had 74, which I believe was that record yesterday. And then 46 today is a pretty darned high number, but it's in the middle of the kind of redness there. Really good stuff. Thanks, Dale. You are a legend. I owe you a pint, and we will have another one. Right, so then we're going to go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, and you can see that is very much in favour of the Ukrainians as well. We've had a pretty bad week for Russian losses as far as the Russians are concerned. Very good for the Ukrainians. It's about a 4-to-1 loss ratio, I would guess. He said, let's go and look at that ourselves. We'll start with the Ukrainian losses first. We have some comms equipment, a couple of boats, and then we get down to the combat asset losses, Bogdana damage, and M1 Abrams damage, and Leopard 2A4 damage. What you're seeing is really interesting. This is also discussed in Perun's video that's excellent, talking about Ukrainian equipment losses. He's seeing a force constitution change, if you like, as you are moving through the older vehicles and starting to see a lot more Western vehicles. Exactly what I've been saying over the last few months is that you are going to see more and more Western vehicles on these loss lists, because that is the nature of attrition, and your replacements are now being more and more Western. I mean, Poland, for example, were insanely helpful in providing at the beginning of the war a huge number of T-72 tanks and the PT Twadis as well, which based on the T-family tanks. So they have done an amazing job, but you're probably not going to see any of those Soviet-era tanks being given to Ukraine anymore. It's just going to be, I think, Western tanks. You've got a lot of Leopard 1s being given and due to be given, and of course some of these Leopard 2s are drip-fed in. We'll talk about the replacement rates going forward. The replacement rates in a second. But yeah, you can see the usual culprits here in terms of M113s, Humvees, and some Senators, more and more Senators being lost, Max Pros. I'll leave that to later. So now let's look at the main point being that there's not hugely valuable equipment being lost on the Ukrainian side there. For the Russians, Strela 10 short-range air defense system being lost, that's obviously going to be fairly valuable. Not the best air defense system, but it is certainly useful for them. And so losing that is going to add to the high-value pieces. Other than that, it's going to be all your normal kind of stuff here. We've got a number of different pieces of artillery, tanks, comms equipment, of course, track garden sheds, a couple of those damaged. Slightly better ratio of destroyed to damaged today than we have seen previously. So in the tanks, it's less than half are destroyed or abandoned. And for the IFVs, it's about half destroyed or abandoned, just over half. But actually, APCs, most of those have been abandoned and destroyed. So, and then some trucks, ATVs, a lot of golf carts and quads, as well as pickup trucks. And look at the destroyed number of civilian vehicles, and damaged civilian vehicles. It's just massive equipment there. Nothing crazy high value. Strela 10, yep, okay. Just an awful lot of equipment. Combat losses ratio is probably only about 2-to-1. Russian to Ukrainian losses, maybe not even that actually. Probably less than 2-to-1, about 1.75-to-1. So the Ukrainians could do with a higher number of those combat asset losses. But in terms of the trucks, these ATVs and whatnot, and civilian vehicles, the Russians are just losing so many pieces of kit. It's interesting when you look to visually confirmed losses, and that sometimes they come in a long time after they've been lost. Here, for example, a previously unseen wreck of a Russian Air Force Ka-52 attack helicopter. The Alligator attack helicopter is hit by 2 missiles, but both crew members managed to survive. if I understood correctly, this happened exactly 2 years ago on the 30th of July 2022, and he didn't find any match for this. So this is, for the first time we are seeing a helicopter loss in the visually confirmed losses, and this took place 2 years ago. And it's one of these high value pieces of equipment whereby quite often I have claimed that where the Ukrainians are probably most inaccurate with their total numbers, no longer I think in the daily additions, but when you look at aircraft and helicopters, I think that some of these are overcooked for the Ukrainians, and that happened from some more charitable additions to the list at the beginning, nearer the beginning of the war. I think they've become more and more accurate. They are more stringent in the criteria to log these losses with the general staff as far as the units are concerned. But it's interesting that even though, they might have overcooked it for aircraft and helicopters, still, like 2 years later, you're finding ones that were claimed to have been shot down and actually were sort of 2 years ago. Interesting. Now, I talked about a huge attack the other day, which is featured in Ukraine. The latest video, I think from this, is this today's one? Yeah, 6 hours ago. So this is today's one, where it talks about this attack on Konstantinivka, which is the Konstantinivka further down the Donetsk front line, below the Pokrovsk region. And coming from here, if you see just there's a road that comes out. It's a road that goes down to Vuhledar. The Russians would like to take Konstantinivka. It would be incredibly important. It means they can then get onto that road, which is on high ground, and then take it all the way down to Vuhledar. They tried to attack here the other day with a huge number of pieces of kit, 70 pieces of kit, I think, in total. Is that what's said here? Yep. And then 200 troops as well. And they were attacking not just in one massive group, it was lots of subgroups with a tank, IFVs and APCs, and then motorbikes behind. And all of these came together simultaneously, and the Ukrainians basically threw everything in defense at these guys as they possibly could. Artillery, drones, and that's FPV drones, and probably drone drop munition dropping drones as well. Mortars, everything at the Russians as they attacked. And as a result, these Russian subgroups took quite a beating. They lost 6 tanks, 10 IFVs, 12 motorcycles, and 77 troops. And it was repelled, right? But it's interesting that they appear to have done a like-for-like attack. Definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But actually, what does happen quite often is they do get different results, or they just grind out a foothold in a place like Konstantinivka. And once they've got that foothold, and it's cost them immeasurably, but they get that foothold, and then it leads on to eventually taking the town. But these things come at inordinate costs. Yet another a successfully repelled Russian assault on the Kharkov front by the 79th Air Assault Brigade. So Kharkov, if you take Konstantinivka and keep going westwards, you get to Kharkov. Despite a large amount of enemy equipment, over 50 in total, Ukrainian forces reportedly destroyed 12 armoured vehicles, 8 tanks, 9 motorbikes and buggies. They killed 36 Russian soldiers and wounded 32. The footage showcases the work of Ukrainian artillery, drone operators, anti-tank units, sappers and infantry. So everything being thrown at the Russians here. As the Russians throw everything at the Ukrainians. 79th Brigade, again, doing a really good job. Slightly different figures here. Russians used 10 tanks, 47 armoured vehicles. This is what they used, not what they lost. 47 armoured fighting vehicles with infantry, 10 motorcycles and 1 buggy in a day. During the battle, our soldiers hit 12 armoured fighting vehicles, 8 Russian tanks, 9 motorbikes and buggy. 36 Russians were destroyed and under 32 were wounded. That's personnel-wise. And apparently that was a repelled attack. Then you've got a lot of activity in the Touretsk area, where the shattered remains of Russian mechanized column burns after running into Ukrainian defenses, and you can see that as actual video footage of that, but I won't show it to you because I'll get in trouble. But yeah, just a lot of kit being taken out, but they're still able to use that to take more and more land. And as we always ask every single day, like, how long can this last? Perun's excellent video this weekend, I still haven't finished it, but I'll show you bits and pieces as I go. The next piece to show you concerns the claims of the Russians against the Ukrainians. So we're looking at the general star figures here, and my conclusion is these are somewhat accurate, and they've got more and more accurate. And when you look at visually confirmed losses, this is what Perun has to say vis-a-vis the Ukrainian claims against the Russian claims. And all of those trolls out there say, why don't you report the Russian stats for Ukrainian losses? Is because they're either impossible or just complete fairy tale fantasy.
What you're seeing on screen here are Ukrainian losses across different equipment categories, according to two very different sources. Those orange bars on the right are visually confirmed losses, including vehicles that were only damaged, which I think serves well as a kind of soft floor to the estimate. The red bars on the left represent an impossibly high upper-end estimate, namely the claims of the Russian Ministry of Defense. And as you can see, there is a slight difference between them, but I bring them up to illustrate a point around potential overclaiming. Both sides are likely to be overclaiming, that's pretty much just the historical default for anyone fighting a war, but the data seems to suggest that the scale at which they're doing so is very different. What you're seeing on screen there is a chart showing the relationship between the claims by both sides and the visual evidence for them. That 15% for Russian aircraft claims, for example, means that for every 100 Ukrainian aircraft that Russia claims to have destroyed, we have evidence for about 15. On the other side, for every 100 Russian aircraft Ukraine claims to have permanently grounded, we have evidence for about 33. The difference there is between overclaiming the evidence by about 3 to 1 and roughly 7 to 1. For every 100 Russian rocket artillery systems the Ukrainians claim to destroy, we have visual evidence for about 35. An overclaim rate, or perhaps a better term here is actually evidence ratio, of less than 3 to 1. For the Russians, every 100 Ukrainian systems claimed will come with evidence of about 6. An evidence ratio of closer to 17 to 1. Going forward, I'm mostly going to be using visually confirmed loss data for reasons I've discussed.
And so on and so forth. The point there, the headline figure is that the Russians are overestimating Ukrainian losses against visually confirmed losses by anywhere between 7 to 1 and 17 to 1. And when the Ukrainians talk about Russian losses, they appear to be operating at about a 3 to 1 claim to visually evidenced losses. Now, you are never going to have one-to-one claim to visually evidence. You're never going to see all the visually evidenced loss. You're never going to see all the losses visually evidenced, right? There are going to be things that are blown up, like I've just shown you. There's a helicopter 2 years ago, and that's a big, big claim, that one. And that hasn't been seen for 2 years. It's sat in a field for 2 years. So how many other pieces of kit are going to sit in fields to be discovered in years and years' time? So the point there is that even though the Ukrainian claims are 3 times higher than the visual evidence for those claims, they could still be accurate. It could be that 2/3 are just not seen by drone footage and satellite footage and so on and so forth. Or they are inaccurate, but they're inaccurate only to a much smaller degree than the Russian claims that are 7 to 17 times higher than the visually confirmed losses. So it's just, we don't believe the Russians because the Russians are either making impossible claims like the claims of the number of aircraft they shot down, which are over 2 times the size of the entire Ukrainian air fleet. It just blows your mind. It's physically impossible what you're claiming, or they're just so utterly implausible that we dismiss them out of hand. Now, the video then goes on to talk about where the Ukrainians are in terms of, say, main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and APCs. Are they able to replace what they started with? And the answer is, in all 3 categories, yes. So what they're being given from Western nations, particularly in APCs, where they're being given a lot of M113s, a lot of Humvees, Senators, all those vehicles, they're being given way more than they started with. So the numbers of those vehicles that they have now compared to what they started with is I think thousands higher than what they started with. But even with tanks and IFVs, especially if you take into account captured and recycled ones, is they are in a better place than they started with. And the type of vehicles that they are now using are better than what they started with as well. So they're getting this upgrade and this consistent level of materiel, whereas the same can't be said for the Russians in terms of like they are just cycling through really old crappy stuff from deep storage and throwing more and more, I think, problematic equipment, or suboptimal equipment, I should say, at the Ukrainians. And I just think and I've said this from the beginning of the war, that the Ukrainians are consistently upgrading their material every single month of this war. So the longer this war goes on, the more you lose the older and older stuff, and the more you'll get newer and newer stuff from Western allies, right? And the Russians are being degraded consistently, and it's going like this. So the Russians are using M46 howitzers, or I know that they can still do a job, but they're getting rid of their SPGs, their self-propelled guns, and replacing them with towed howitzers, and they are running out of MTLBs. They're using golf buggies and so on and so forth. And I just think, you see images like this where they're now starting to use electric buggies near the front line, and you could say, well, actually, it's quite useful, better than walking, absolutely. But again, it's like, would you have expected this 2 years ago? I just think that the prognosis for the Ukrainians, I'd much rather be the Ukrainians now than the Russians, but the Russians are just still able to take that ground by throwing in everything they've got. Anyway, I advise you to watch that Purim video. It's very good, as you would expect. Now on to distant strikes. It was an explosive night in Kursk. Again, it seems to have had a lot of attention over the last week, Kursk Oblast, just north of the Ukrainian border. Powerful explosions occurred near the airport. Meanwhile, the Russians claim they allegedly shot down 4 missiles, and that's the operative word there is missiles, because we're used to seeing a lot more attack drones being sent over the border. So I wonder what missiles they were. Explosion and dense smoke have been reported in Rostov. So if you think the Sea of Azov, just to the top right of there, you've got Rostov-on-Don, Taganrog, Mariupol, Berdyansk. So that's where Rostov is. An explosion and dense smoke have been reported in Rostov, likely a warehouse containing drone components. Flash news adds, whole city was engulfed in smoke. Local channels report a fire and warehouses and polycarbonate is burning. It is written in the network that the Russians may have kept a large number of components of drones at that location, so no surprise that is on fire. The warning is that yesterday the Russian Navy deployed all 3 cruise missile capable submarines in the Black Sea for the first time. It's an unusual move, but it does signal A, a naval build-up, but B, potentially a massive missile strike is on the way. So I'd expect over the next 48 hours a huge missile strike on Ukraine. Just keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, and I'll let you know if and when it happens. But the Ukrainians will be definitely very tensely expecting something of that sort. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Now remember, whether it's very challenging for the fighting on the front line in a different way than it is in the winter. It's one extreme to another. Russian pilot fighter bomber, so that fairly reliable Russian serving Telegram channel. He reveals that Russia is now recruiting military airfield personnel into assault units. According to him, Russia has created a motorized rifle regiment of the aerospace forces. The video shows a training of this unit. There is even a pilot in this regiment, apparently. So there is a video to support this as well. Oh, I won't play it to you. It's going to have music and it will annoy me. So the point here is that the Russians are fielding people on the ground who should not be fielded as infantry. Just, to use a pilot because you're that desperate, is this a sign that Russia are at a critical point? People recruited from airfields, engineering, technical staff, flight crews and flight crews present, armed forces, radio operators, mechanics, engine and brake engineers, sergeants, warrant officers and officers. Seems there's even one navigator. They fight normally as everything is provided, no complaints, everything is fine. This is approximately the same as a motorized rifle regiment of the Alexandrov Choir, or a CSKA, that's a football team, assault brigade. There must be some message or conclusion here, but it is not there. Today, this is a given. He is obviously understating how much of an issue that is there with a touch of tongue-in-cheek. Now, there's a reaction to that post by a mobilized blogger who adds that Russian units are repurposing personnel with soldiers often reassigned to different roles. He criticizes the positional offensive strategy, which drains Russian reserves quickly. This strain on troops and a high injury threshold for demobilization reflect the unsustainable strategy of relying on poorly trained infantry and insufficient firepower. He brings examples such as sending mortar or sniper crews into assaults after the loss of materiel. So this is not good news. So I'll just read a little bit, or I'll read this actually, because I think this is important. Fighter Bomber posted about VKS Motorized Rifle Regiment. At the end, he writes that there must be some conclusion, but does not voice it. I'll try and voice it. This is a tricky one under the slogan, as long as there's not a second wave of mobilization, various types of units are scooping up contract personnel for replenishment, or the formation of new detachments and even units, as we see from the reports. So in other words, the context of this is the Russian refusal to do a second mobilization because it would be deeply unpopular, and you would lose all sorts of people. There's arguments that they've lost maybe up to 2.5 million people leaving the country or going into hiding or whatever. Then that affects the labour shortage and the economy, etc., etc., and popularity, political popularity as well. Before this video, I heard that the Navy, as soon as possible, transfers contract soldiers to Marine brigades, including transforming of the commandant's platoon into an assault platoon. Now here is a motorized rifle regiment consisting of VKS personnel. So you've got the Navy personnel who are obviously not going to be so needed in terms of, they've lost some ships, but essentially you cannot rotate naval personnel as much maybe in your other, say, your Arctic fleet, and you can get those people that you would normally be conscripting and then contracting into the Navy. You can just turn them into Marines, so these are your naval soldiers, and then send them to Ukraine as naval infantry brigades. And likewise, they're taking people from the Air Force, from the VKS, from the Air Force, whether they be maintenance or even pilots, and turning them into infantry brigades. In addition, there are situational initiatives at the front. For example, taking at least a few unnecessary signalmen in scare quotes there, signalmen to replenish the assault company, transfer RMO officers to the UAV platoon being formed because contractors or specialists from mobilization have not appeared, form an evacuation group from a mortar battery after the loss of materiel, disband the sniper platoon of the sniper company in order to transfer personnel to the assault platoon. This is all turnover starting around December 2023, the result of constant, without operational pauses for replenishment and preparation of a positional offensive. Let's add to this the inflated requirements for traumatism after wounds or injuries as a basis for demobilization, requiring to lose not just one finger but two on one hand, and so on. In other words, you used to be able to be demobilized if you lost a finger because, that's pretty bad. Go and get some R&R or whatever. Now they're like, you can lose one finger. Now you've got to lose two to be demobilized. And so on and so forth. So people are staying in with much greater injuries. We heard about that kind of cripple platoon, as it was called recently, or unit, and so on. As a result, there are crowds of cripples in the recruitment from which individual commanders scoop up reinforcements for assaults. As stories from the internet show, and the fact that they tend to discharge the slightly wounded early is even more widely known. All this is the very reverse side of the adopted grinding strategy and constant, without proper causes, pressure on all fronts. The grinding is mutual. And the Ukrainians are striving to improve the personnel exchange rate for themselves to at least 1-to-1. Hence the bet on 1 million drones, on the speed of artillery response on the F-16 and existing aircraft as carriers of the KAB. Those are guided glide bombs. All these are bells, I presume warning alarms, and the VKS motorized regiment generally rings the alarm bell that either there will be a truce or a second wave of mobilization. The adopted strategy of relying on striking with poorly trained infantry instead of increasing firepower by adding its 1 million drones to hundreds of artillery barrels makes a second wave almost inevitable. And that's it. Like, either they go to the negotiating table or they do a second mobilization. I mean, this is what I've said for a long time. They can't achieve remotely what they want to, the Russians, without a second mobilization. And I don't think they have a choice there. Now, going back to Mali, where it looks like the Ukrainians have possibly been in support of the Tuareg rebels there. There was this photo that came out showing a Ukrainian flag next to, I presume, the Malian flag there, and you got this chap standing next to them who I don't want to be I don't want to pigeonhole people, but my guess is from his skin color he's probably not Malian. And probably is Ukrainian. So the Ukrainians arguably are involved in that massacre, or were involved in that massacre of the Wagner personnel who were fighting in Mali. 80 of them lost and 15 of them captured. Right, in the Duma, the Russian parliament, quote, "Where is the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation? It's gone. This is in fact a victory of the enemy. This is in the fact of defeat, as with Kherson, because the enemy is stronger than us." An excellent statement by Yevgeny Fedorov, State Duma deputy from United Russia. He recalled how the Russian occupiers were going to land in Odessa, but were left without Snake Island, Kherson, and ships in the Black Sea. Quote, "The enemy is stronger than us, not in the nuclear sphere. NATO cannot be defeated," he said. Wow. So if you're starting to see people say things like this out loud in Parliament, interesting. What do we have here? Oh yeah, just watch out for disinformation. A couple of points. In fact, I'll bring our mate here just forward one. So I don't know why you might think this Finnish pro-Russian account could be a bot. So Jarno Vitanen with the Finnish flag there says error 452. AI is undergoing a maintenance break. Expected downtime 24 hours. Obviously not a bot. And sometimes you get people hacking into them and asking questions like, give me a cupcake recipe. And because the AI bot doesn't know how to deal with that, it literally gives them a cupcake recipe. And so people have been playing with these Russian bots quite a lot. But it's very clear that Russian bots are active. In fact, there are warnings out from US, I think, security services talking about the interference within the US elections that they're really worried about at the moment from Russian trolls, bots, AI bots, as you would expect, right? Here, remember I reported that yesterday Colonel Douglas Macgregor, no, not Colonel, it's been stripped from him, Douglas Macgregor, claimed that 18 SAS members were killed in Ukraine. In addition, he stated among the dead were members of the French army. The false story came from a Spanish conspiracy theorist who has a long history of making crap up. And Pekka Kallioniemi has done a Vatnik soup on that person, who is a Spanish writer, colonel and attention seeker, Pedro Baños, best known for his takes on geostrategy, for his hate of the Anglo-Saxon world, and for his long-lasting low-key support of Russia. Okay, and that's who Colonel Douglas Macgregor takes his information from. So I had someone else this morning in my thread saying, "Oh, what do you think about Douglas Macgregor?" Blah blah blah. Saying that I was like, "Shut up, you're a troll." Like, I don't, no time for this human being. He is invariably completely wrong, and here we have him relying on someone who is invariably completely wrong for his invariably completely wrong conclusion or claim. So yeah, don't come at me with your McGregors and Ritters anymore. You know, you can. I was gonna swear and be rude. When I was younger, we used the toilet like. I'm going to swear, I do apologise, but we say the shitter would be Rick Witter. So Rick Witter would, I'm going to the Rick Witter. Rick Witter was the lead singer for a 90s Britpop band called Shed 7, who I really liked. And so that in the 90s, it was, I think it should be Scott Ritter now. I'm going to the Scott Ritter. And that evokes, I mean, I like Rick Witter. It was a shame he got associated with the toilet, but I don't like Scott Ritter, and I'd be happy to take a dump on Scott Ritter. You get my meaning there. Let's get some rhyming slang back in the lexicon. Right, okay. I apologise for degrading the conversation. Jakub Janovsky here from Oryx saying, in my opinion, political interference demanding that the Ukrainian military holds or retakes positions are not viable has repeatedly cost Ukraine lots of troops and equipment just so that some fools in Kiev can, for PR reasons, delay a few days or weeks the loss of some positions. He's replying to Tatargami. So Tatargami has been one of these people with frontelligence insight that has been very critical of the Ukrainian military and very critical of, I think, by extension, Zelensky. Jakub Janovsky of Oryx says, in my opinion, Sersky has been facilitating a lot of this BS since the war started. Yermak, who is part of the head of the presidential team, he's like Zelensky's right-hand man. A lot of people say he's the most powerful man in Ukraine, who is behind quite a few such requests, and a bunch of others should immediately, unceremoniously be fired and replaced by people who have enough spine to push back against such BS. So what's Tatargami originally saying? I'm not going to go into this whole... well, actually, yeah, no, it's not a thread. I will read this. So this is going to be a critical take on what's going on in Ukraine from I believe from a Ukrainian. In today's speech, Zelensky, after talking to Commander-in-Chief General Syrskyi, reported that Ukraine has the strength to achieve its goals. While he is correct that Ukraine has the strengths and resources to take the worsening situation under control, the situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains critical and some areas of defence have started to collapse. Feedback from officers and soldiers on the ground, the rapid progress of Russian forces and the unacceptable attitude towards regular soldiers from higher command indicate that the situation is not under control. It is not a total disaster only due to the actions of people on the ground who are trying their best to prevent advances and showing examples of individual heroism and leadership. Of course, deliveries of F-16s, permission to strike deeper into Russia, and supplements of vehicles would have helped the situation, but resources alone can't fix a problem of continuous command mistakes, including unrealistic tasks disproportionate to available human resources, combined with demands to retake lost positions. Unsurprisingly, for the past few months, following the events in Kharkiv, there have been circulating rumours about the administration's dissatisfaction with Syrskyi and his potential replacement. The decision to remove the 80th Brigade commander, followed by the public demand from the officers of the 80th Brigade to reinstate the commander, might accelerate this progress. That being said, while Syrskyi might be responsible for the many problems on the front line, he is also executing the vision and will of the president in many cases, and it was a decision to appoint him. His decision to appoint him. My team has been working on a comprehensive update on the area, but the Russians have progressed so quickly multiple times that we had to postpone the report to include the latest updates, redo the maps and add new details. Hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to address most of the questions regarding the situation in the Pokrovsk direction and cover the problematic situation. So he is, very critical, or a few people are very critical of this situation for the Ukrainians and how the Ukrainians have been operating from the top down. Now, just to move on to a completely different subject here, this is a claim and I have absolutely no idea where this is. It's a bit of sky and it's a plane in the sky that I have no idea what that plane is, but claim is it's F-16 in Ukrainian sky. So there you go. There have been these claims that they've been operating from Romania near Odessa. That could be an F-16 in the Ukrainian sky, or it could be an F-16 in some other sky, or it could be another plane in the Ukrainian sky, or who knows? It could be AI. It's there. Let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.